Hello and welcome back to another fantasy football video. I hope everyone is doing well. We have a double game week 19 fastly approaching. So today we're going to be taking a look at players who have a good double game week 19. We're going to be picking players from Chelsea and Fulham, the two teams that do double, but then also considering players that don't necessarily double and set you up a bit better after the double game weeks, as I feel like we can get tied down a little bit too much at times by just focusing primarily on the double game weeks. If you're new around here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really does help me out. Hit that like button if you're enjoying the content. Comment down below the players that you're thinking of bringing in for this coming double game week 19, and let's get straight on into this one. So the first team that we are looking at is Chelsea. Chelsea play against Manchester City at home and then Fulham away from home. Probably not two of the most ideal fixtures, but I picked out three players here that I think could be decent to target for those fixtures. We've gone for Kepa, Mason Mount and Thiago Silva. Now for me, the order there that I've said them in is very much the order in which I think they are good options. So Kepa being the number one option. He is the main man now under Graham Potter. Potter seems to back him between the sticks, prefers his kind of distribution and his style of play, and it very much has shown that when Kepa is in goal for Chelsea, they have been keeping more clean sheets than when the likes of Mendy has been in goal. Kepa is also picking up plenty of save points and picking up bonus points along with that as well. Coming in at 4.5 million, he seems like a fantastic option, not just for this double game week, but also moving past this game week as well. So I feel like a lot of you will have maybe an Edison, maybe a De Gea, or just a 4.5 million goalkeeper that it only takes one transfer for you to be bringing Kepa in. And so I think that Kepa is probably my number one transfer target for this game week. Then taking a look at a Chelsea attacker. The only Chelsea attacker that I have gone for is Mason Mount. You could argue that Kai Havertz is a decent option, but he does have a bit more competition than Mount from the likes of Aubameyang, whereas I would think that Mason Mount's place in that Chelsea team is a little bit more solidified. Now his underlying stats still aren't that great. As you can see there, he's got an XG of 0.14 and expected assist of 0.15, which means that basically 1 in every 3 games are expecting him to get an attack in return, and especially with that Manchester City fixture being first, we aren't necessarily expecting him to do anything in that fixture, or Chelsea kind of in general going forward. If you do already own him, fantastic. He's already returned for you against Bournemouth and now has a nice fixture away to Forest. If you are thinking of bringing him in, I still think it is quite a luxury move. So if you have the one transfer to bring him in, I don't think that's necessarily too bad of an option. I wouldn't really be forcing him in unless the players you are taking out don't look particularly good going forward. He is quite a nice little placeholder there for the likes of, say, an Odegaard, a Troassard, even a Bukayo Saka. So I don't actually mind it too much as a punt for this coming game week. So if that is your plan, then the two transfers could be viable, but I most definitely would not be taking a sort of hit to be bringing the likes of Mason Mount in. Then finally we have Thiago Silva. Now Silva basically covers the likes of Koulibaly and Cucurella. I think that Silva and Koulibaly are more kind of certain to start in that Potter defence, whether it's a 4-back or a 3-back. I expect both of those to start, whereas Cucurella seems to be nailed in the 4-back, but not necessarily in the 3 at the back. Now with Silva, we basically just have to solely discuss the chances of Chelsea keeping a clean sheet. Now against Manchester City, that is probably unlikely, and against Fulham, a side that was scoring plenty of goals, especially with it being at Craven Cottage, I can actually see that there is a pretty decent potential of Chelsea conceding goals in both games. So if you have one free transfer, then I consider, potentially it to be a good transfer to bring in the likes of Thiago Silva or Koulibaly, but actually I can see the likelihood of these guys getting sort of 1 or 2 pointers in both of those games. Then I also want to pose the question, is it worth captaining any of these options? Well, I think that Kepa could actually be a viable captain just by sheer fact of the save points that he's getting. I feel like his base in both games is probably 3 points, with the likelihood that he will pick up some save points, which means that across the 2 games, he'll probably end up getting at least 6 points, which, I'd be pretty happy. I'd be reasonably happy with that in terms of a captaincy return. With Mason Mount, I feel like just by simply owning him, that is differential enough. If he does do anything, that'll give you a nice enough gain in rank. And with the teams that he is playing at the underlying stats that he has, I could also see him getting a sort of 4 or 5 pointer. And then I would be avoiding the likes of Thiago Silva and Koulibaly as a captaincy option. So the other team that does double is Fulham. They play against Leicester away from home. Then they play Chelsea at home. So the options that I've gone for here are Mitrovic, Andreas and Leno. I'd say the number one option is Mitrovic. He's offered really good value so far this season, still coming in at 6.9 million, which makes him an extremely affordable option. He's got an expected goal return of basically a goal return a game. His expected goal return is actually currently better than Harry Kane's, which shows just how good of a season he is having. He is on penalties and he's got 10 goals and 2 assists so far this season. Now, one thing to mention about Mitrovic is he still does have the Southampton game to play. If he does pick up a yellow card in that game, that means he will be missing the Leicester game, and the same for the Leicester game. If he doesn't pick up a yellow card in the Southampton game, if he picks one up in the Leicester game, then he will miss the Chelsea game. So he could quite easily end up just having a single game week for Mitrovic. If he gets through the Southampton game, though, I think it is well worth the risk in terms of bringing Mitrovic in. Now, he's the player that I am most scared of this coming game week. I'm not going to be owning him. There's just not a viable way for me to get him into my team, and I feel like he could be the one that kind of crushes my rank the most. Currently at about 20% ownership, I can see before that the game rising pretty heavily. Deadline. The next guy we are looking at is Andreas. Now, quite a few of us will already own Andreas, and so for me, it's quite an easy play in this double game week. He's getting very far forward in the heat. If you saw the heat map for the Crystal Palace game, you'd actually have seen that he was playing further forward than Mitrovic and still playing pretty centrally as well. If Mitrovic does end up getting the yellow card, we've also seen that Andreas is on penalties and is basically on all of set pieces, on all corners and all free kicks as well. His underlying stats are okay. Expected a goal return in 1 in 3 games, but he is just such a good budget enabler. But it does beg the question, if you don't own him, should you be bringing him into your team? A lot of people I've seen go with sort of 5 more expensive midfielders. I wouldn't necessarily be downgrading one of those midfielders just for the sake of getting Andreas in for this double game week, because after this double game week, Fulham's fixtures don't look particularly great, so you'd probably end up just benching Andreas from that point onwards anyway. But if you do have a player that you feel like you can get rid of in the midfield, or even a budget midfielder that isn't Andreas, I feel like it's quite an easy one transfer, because realistically you're not going to be needing to kind of get any money in order to be able to afford Andreas, because he's 4.6 million, so you should quite easily be able to transfer him in just on the one free transfer. And the final guy that we are taking a look at is Burns Leno picking up 59 saves so far this season, and when Fulham have managed to keep a clean sheet, he has been doing pretty well in terms of getting on the bonus points as well. In some games picking up 10, 11 points just by virtue of the fact that he's got a clean sheet and then got on the saves and got on the bonus points as well. At 4.5 million, he's the same price as Kepa. I would say that Kepa is probably a little bit better of an option, not just for the double game week, but also going forward. But if you fancy yourself a little bit more of a differential, then Leno could be the guy for you. Now, I don't expect them to keep a clean sheet in either game against Leicester or against Chelsea, but as with Kepa, I can see the baseline being sort of 3 points in each game. Now, are any of these players good captaincy options? I would err on the side of risk with these guys. Mitrovic on paper looks like a really good captaincy if he does play both games, but with the risk that it could turn into a single game week for him, I'd probably avoid captaining him. Now, Andreas, I think, is a good enough option just to simply have playing. He arguably, because Mitrovic does have the potential of getting that yellow card, you could make the point that Andreas, with how forward he is getting, the fact that he is a midfielder, so kind of gets more points in terms of more points for scoring goals, gets a point for the clean sheet, that actually he is a more viable option, potentially even than the likes of Mason Mount. And then finally with Leno, I think if I'm saying that Kepa is a decent captaincy option, then you have to say the same for Leno, albeit that I would expect Chelsea to keep a clean sheet against Fulham, whereas I wouldn't necessarily expect Fulham to keep a clean sheet against Chelsea. So I think that Kepa is a better captaincy option than Leno and generally a better pick than Leno, but I wouldn't rule out the possibility of going for Leno in this double game week. Then finally, I thought we'd consider a couple of players that have decent single game weeks and also just generally look quite good going forward from this point onwards. Firstly, we've got Harry Kane. Now, Kane plays against a Crystal Palace side that really have looked quite poor since the international return, losing 3-0 against Fulham. Kane can continue on his good form for Spurs and does have a good scoring history against Crystal Palace. And as you can see there, he's scored 109 points so far this season, getting basically a goal return a game, picking up 13 goals and 3 assists. And the strong thing about Harry Kane has been when he's picking up goals and assists, he has also been getting on the bonus points, which is why he has got such a good score so far this season. Also, after his single game week 19, he does then proceed to have a double game week 20. So you could be setting yourself up quite nicely by finding a move to Kane this week, or at least thinking about a way in which you can bring him in for that double game week 20. Next, we've got a man that has been on complete fire throughout this season, instrumental in their creativity and in their attack, and that is Martin Odegaard of Arsenal, picking up 88 points so far this season with 6 goals and 4 assists. Now, Odegaard for me is quite a long-term move. I feel like moving now to the 5 at the midfielder formation, picking a player that when he picks up an assist or a goal gets himself 2 or 3 bonus points, also playing for a side that likes a clean sheet. I feel like your base points with Odegaard is actually pretty high. They do have a double game week in game week 23, but that is quite a long way away, and we don't necessarily need to be planning for that just yet, especially with the fact that there are probably due some more double game weeks prior to that. With Odegaard though, and with Arsenal, they're on such great form that I feel like getting at least 2 of their attackers in. Most of us will have Martinelli, some of you have Saka. I feel like Odegaard is the guy to go for at 6.4 million. He's great value for money and allows you to get kind of the likes of Kane, Salah, KDB and Haaland into your team, as well as having a player that's just on cracking form. And the next guy we are looking at is Leandro Troassard of Brighton. Now, his expected goal stats of just 0.37 don't quite live up to how well he has actually been doing so far this season, scoring 7 goals and 3 assists. He's been kind of a player that just pops up in the odd game and just bangs in a brace and hauls a kind of 14, 15, 16 pointer. He is now being trusted by De Zerbi in that striker position, so I'm very much expecting in the coming game weeks for him to do quite well. He has a nice fixture against Everton in the coming game week, in the coming game week 19, and with the amount of fixtures that Brighton do still have to be rescheduled, we could very much expect them to be getting a double game week in 21, maybe even in 23 as well. And so I think that getting yourself a Troassard could set you up quite nicely going forward. Now, this has been a quick little look at some players that I feel could be viable going into this double game week 19. With the double game weeks, I don't think it's too good of an idea to necessarily get too caught up in sort of like overhauling your teams just for the virtue of the fact that some players do double. For example, the likes of Mason Mount, the likes of Thiago Silva could easily go and end up getting 3 to kind of 5 points and then not actually set yourself up too well going forward. So if you have the luxury of just using one transfer to get these players in, then I'd say probably worth it, but I wouldn't be going to kind of 2 transfers, maybe worth it. -4s, definitely a no-go for me. But if you have enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit that like button. Hit the subscribe button, really does help me out. Comment down below any players you're thinking of bringing in, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.